We're almost halfway through the year, and a lot of people are running on empty without fully realizing it. Grow Therapy helps you find care that's covered by insurance before burnout becomes the baseline. Whether it's your first time in therapy or your 50th, Grow makes it easier to find a therapist who fits you, not the other way around. They connect you with thousands of independent licensed therapists across the U.S., offering both virtual and in-person sessions, nights and weekends. You can search by what matters, like insurance, specialty, identity, or availability, and get started in as little as 2 days. And if something comes up, you can cancel up to 24 hours in advance at no cost. There are no subscriptions, no long-term commitments. You just pay per session. Grow helps you find therapy on your time. Whatever challenges you're facing, Grow Therapy is here to help. Grow accepts over 100 insurance plans, including Medicaid in some states. Sessions average about $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0 depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/booknow to get started. That's growtherapy.com/booknow. growtherapy.com/booknow. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello, Rank Squad, and welcome to Ranks FC and a very special edition of Champions League Takeaway. We don't do these very often, but we are going to be previewing the Champions League final on today's episode. My name's Jack Collins, and I'll be your host today. And joining me across the water is our transfer guru, Mr. Dean Jones. How you doing, mate?
Hello, mate. Yeah, I'm okay. I mean, we have to tell people that you've got this poor voice today that you've got you're nursing. So I would carry you, mate, but I'm not sure I can fulfill a full hour here. But yeah, your croaky voice will get us through. You're like Arsenal crawling towards the Champions League final, aren't you? But you got a kick in your step, hopefully, like they did from the weekend Premier League trophy lift.
Just delighted to be back alongside you, my friend. So we'll power through this one in many ways. And look, this is so much better than it was 12 hours ago. So in terms of how that all plays out, I think that's something that we can all look forward to. But I'm looking forward to this, DJ. You're going to talk about Arsenal in part one. I'm going to talk about PSG in part two. We'll try and give our analysis of how we think this might play out with all the different sort of elements that are still up in the air a little bit. I think with the final in terms of injuries and who's going to be back. But I'm really excited about this. We haven't had a Champions League final between two league winners since 2020. And arguably, you have to go back even further than that to find a Champions League final that was legitimately, and I think fairly, the best two teams in Europe. Now, look, there will be arguments to that, and I'm sure people will point at Bayern Munich, who are definitely the third team in that equation. I think in terms of how it's all been, and perhaps Barcelona as well, who've been phenomenal in La Liga. But I do think that actually on the balance of it, this is last season's champions, the team who have got over the line finally after years of consistency that have taken them almost to the brink of it in Arsenal. And you come up with two different styles of play. I think as finals go, this is the one I've been the most excited for in a little while.
Yeah, I think it should be. And I think it was funny. I was speaking to Dylan, my 8-year-old son, yesterday about this Champions League final. And he said, oh, that's a really good idea, actually. Like, they should make the winners of the leagues play against each other in a cup. I was like, well, that's what the Champions League was supposed to be, mate. Like, that's how it started. And then people got greedy and started inviting more and more teams to make a bigger tournament to make more money. So he got that chat from me at a very early age. But he was like, yeah, but that's really good because you've got the best team in France and the best team in Europe against the best team in England. Like, that's what it's supposed to be. And actually, it goes further than that, really, because not only do you have the European champions in another final, in a successive final, but you have in Arsenal not just the Premier League winners, but the winners of the Champions League group phase when they won every game. Like, Arsenal do deserve to be here. Like, you know, for the wobble that they had, I think that shows a sense of resilience as well. But this is the team that set the pace for everyone else in this competition this season. And as a result of that, and obviously PSG weren't amazing through the group phase, but
they weren't last year either. And we know that for some teams, those group phases don't matter. And I think I've talked before, I think it's something we'll see in the World Cup. I don't think necessarily, say, take Brazil, for example, when we get to the World Cup, they might not have the best group stage. They might even lose their opening game against Morocco. But then they'll get to the knockouts and you wonder if an Ancelotti side kicks on and plays the game differently to everybody else once you get to knockout stage. And it's kind of what PSG have done. They can put teams to the sword in a way that almost nobody else can do across Europe, particularly as consistently as PSG have shown it over the past 2 years. Nobody can. So that is Arsenal's test. And it'll be interesting across the course of this episode to weigh up the pros and cons of these two teams. PSG are the favourites to go and lift a trophy again, but we are going to see history made here because PSG can go and retain their trophy, or Arsenal can go and win it for the first time. I was there 20 years ago when they failed to win this trophy. They lost the final to Barcelona, and I can remember how deflating that was for every Arsenal fan. We were in Paris, and I can remember the build up to that game. And obviously, Paris was a great place for a Champions League final for a team from London because it was so easy to get to. And even if you didn't have tickets, you wanted to be in Paris over that period. And it was a big build up to the game. And that day, Arsenal ended up having their goalkeeper sent off. And even though they made a good run of the game and were leading in it, they ended up losing to a Barcelona team that were very good. And I just remember coming out of there and getting kind of the train back towards our hotel area. And I remember earlier in the day thinking, I wonder what it'd be like later. Will I join in the celebrations with the Arsenal fans if they win? And there just was it's awful losing a final. You've been there, I've been there, many people have been there and watched their teams in finals and felt that just empty feeling. And for Arsenal fans who have just, watched their team at the weekend go and win the Premier League and end that 22-year end, that 22-year wait, they now should have belief and optimism that they can also end this run. I think that's probably a nice place to start, right? Because we've spoken all season long about Arsenal as a club and what this is, and we'll get into the kind of tactical elements of all of this, how they approach this game. But first and foremost, Arsenal have just ended that 22-year wait for a Premier League trophy. Now, I take some umbrage with the idea that people keep saying 22 years of hurt when most clubs would kill for 5 FA Cups in that time. But I take the point of celebration. It's been a long time coming, and I think the last couple of years have only exacerbated that with kind of finishing seconds 3 times in a row, kind of the whole always the bridesmaids, never the bride kind of chat. Does winning the Premier League and getting that over the line, and therefore being able to kind of rotate a little bit and rest a few players for this Crystal Palace game, does this put Arsenal into a position where actually this feels like a free hit? Because so many of the fan base looked at this season and thought, you know what, the Premier League is the be all and end all. If we win the Premier League, nothing else really matters. Now they're in a European final. Obviously, people will feel differently, right? You get different views at the end and the beginning of seasons. That's fine. But will it take the pressure off those players because they have finally ended that Premier League wait to go and be champions and finally kind of climb the mountain in some regards?
Yeah, I think so. I think the elation at the end of that game at Crystal Palace at the weekend is something that spread from the stands and on the pitch it came through the TV here in San Diego. So I can't imagine how good it was around London and how good it will be around London if they can now go on and do the double. There's
already quite a lot of Arsenal shirts knocking about. I'll give you that for free.
I mean, yeah, they're all chanting, "We are unbearable" and all this. And they've got every right to be like that. Everyone,
100%.
Everyone was ready to ram this down their throats. People in England from other clubs loved that they were going to bottle it again. They loved that they didn't have the balls to go and win a title, right? And it genuinely did look like that, which annoyed me because obviously I backed them all season. I said they won't bottle it this time. They're too good. They are the best team in this league. And then I started to doubt them too after the Carabao Cup, because I was like, it really does look like something's gone. But then we should also remember that there was that moment with Declan Rice when they lost, and he was sat on the floor shouting, "It's not done. It's not done." And in that moment, it seemed like he seemed like a temperamental child, right? Refusing to believe that playtime was done, that recess was over.
I don't know, like,
but it was more than that.
It's fine. Like, I still maintain that was a little bit performative as much as anything else. But you know what? If that spread into the dressing room,
I don't know if it was, mate. I honestly,
if that spread into the dressing room and it worked, then you know what? Fair enough. Whatever you need to do to get things over the line.
He manifested something within himself. He had to believe that couldn't be the end. He'd worked too hard for that to be the end. And Declan Rice gets a really hard time, I think. You know, even right now, you know, when there's the video of him at the end of the Palace game the other day, watching the screen, discovering that West Ham had been relegated. And his disappointment to me was very clear and very real. And he walks away disappointed.
Fair enough and fine.
And
I mean, I'm always going to give him the wrong end of the stick because he has personally hurt me to an incredible degree.
Yeah, well, that was your fault for choosing to be Irish. But West Ham fans are saying they don't believe it. He doesn't. We don't mean anything to him, and all these sorts of things. Like they don't believe that he could care about West Ham. I do believe that Declan Rice cares about West Ham. He had to leave that club to fulfill what was possible for him, and he made the right choice. I did a little recording on Patreon where I was talking about this, and I've seen players leave Fulham and kill their careers because they chose the wrong club. Largely, they chose Tottenham. Some chose Liverpool. For a lot of them, it didn't work, right? And it's killed me in those moments because I'm like, I don't mind you leaving, but you're just not, this isn't the one for you. And West Ham can't do that to Declan Rice. He's gone to Arsenal for £105 million and he's won the league and he's playing in a Champions League final at the weekend, and then he's got a World Cup straight after that, which he's going to be pivotal in.
It's not his fault that they messed up spending that £105 million.
Exactly.
I will take that.
Like, there's nobody can understand how West Ham's board behave when it comes to the spending of money, least of all Declan Rice. And at least he raised some for him. So, look, Declan Rice, I think, is actually a really key part. I mean, the way that we're going to talk about this today is we'll do Arsenal in this first section, and then we'll have a break, and then you can talk about PSG after that. But, you know, I do think that Declan Rice is so central to not just the success that they've had so far, but the success that they might get now over the weekend. He has become a talisman. And I also think he now has somewhat of an ulterior motive in that he's got the Arsenal fan base behind him who feel he's been hard done by in not being the player of the year. You know, I don't know how it's fair to judge Declan Rice against Bruno Fernandes, because on a personal level, Bruno Fernandes has inspired Man United to come third in the league. He's got the assist record for the season, etc., etc. But I understand completely the argument that Declan Rice has inspired Arsenal to their first Premier League title in 22 years, and they're on the brink of winning the Champions League for the first time ever. So I understand that. And if he does now put on a man of the match winning performance in the final, then to be honest, he is the player of the year. And I don't know how they get another one made, but maybe Roy Keane will make him one, because Roy Keane doesn't seem to really like Bruno Fernandes. So maybe Roy Keane will make him a special award. I don't know.
I'd be
Doubt
surprised.
it, though, seeing as he's probably not the biggest fan of Declan Rice either. I think he's in your camp on that one. But yeah, Declan Rice is key. And obviously one of the things we need to talk about when it comes to Arsenal and having a chance of winning the Champions League is to talk about set pieces, to which Declan Rice has obviously been pivotal because of his ability from a dead ball. Set piece again, ole ole, and all of that. Arsenal set a new record for goals scored from corners last season. 19 goals from corners in the Premier League last season. And that is incredible, right? And look, I'm not saying it. Arsenal weren't the prettiest Premier League title winners you've ever seen. Not claiming they were. The season before, they were actually one of the most best teams I've seen in terms of the way that there was a stretch of the year where actually Arsenal were great. But to win the title, they've had to show different aspects of their play. And Declan Rice obviously is a defensive destroyer, but he's also become more of a box-to-box player, but he's also a set-piece expert. And we will still be in a situation here whereby those set pieces could prove pivotal to Arsenal going on to win the Champions League. Now, I have to say that if Arsenal do go and get the job done, then it's going to be narrow, right? Like, this isn't going to be a game that Arsenal win 3-0, and nobody's expecting that. But I think it's pretty clear that the identity of this team changed since March, basically. You know, they started to have that wobble around losing the Carabao Cup final. At the end of March, they lost to Southampton. After that, and their wins then have basically, well, apart from beating Fulham 3-0, they've all been by one goal. And a lot of them have been 1-0. So they obviously had Sporting in the Champions League over 2 legs. They beat them 1-0 and they drew 0-0. Then in the semi-final, they played Atletico Madrid and they played them twice, obviously, and drew 1-1 and 1-0. So they've won by 1 goal. And then you look at last weekend. Didn't really matter. It was just a trophy lift game. Arsenal won 2-1. But you go back. They beat Burnley 1-0. West Ham 1-0. They beat Newcastle 1-0. There's just been a lot of them in there. And I wrote a little article on The Athletic about a month ago, being like, do Arsenal now claim glory in the old 1-0 to the Arsenal manner? Because it seemed like that was the only way it was going to become possible. And it's basically happened. That is basically how they've got over the line so far in terms of winning the Premier League and in terms of getting to this Champions League final. So I think that's interesting that is the way that they're going to win this final. It's going to be close. But I do think that the momentum of the weekend helps them have a belief. I believe in Arsenal more today than I did on Saturday because I've just from what I witnessed from the stands they basically merged into one, didn't they, at Selhurst Park? I mean, it was a strange old scene, really.
It's weird not having it at home, I think, but yeah.
It is weird when teams don't lift a trophy at home. But Selhurst Park will obviously now become special to anyone who was there. But what was kind of magical about it was that the fans turned into the playing staff and the families. The way that Selhurst Park was, and it seemed to be pretty badly policed to me too, because it wasn't that hard to get on the pitch. And there was kind of a sea of faces that kind of merged from the stands into the pitch because people were kind of bridging the gap that had existed there. But what it did do is it brought a sense of togetherness that left those players in no doubt. You know, I've seen fan videos of people that jumped over, got onto that pitch and was able to go up to, they're going and saying, I love you, Bukayo, I love you, Dek, I love you. And they're like, they've actually been able to say some of them. And they were let off. You know, a lot of people have posted these videos and people are like, did you get in trouble? Are you banned? Are you arrested? They're like, no, they let me off. Everyone was let off on Sunday. And what's happened is that Arsenal now have a bond, I think, that exists heading to Budapest that is stronger than ever before. And look, I've knocked Arsenal fans before for turning on their own team. I think that there's an element of their fan base that can be flaky and unsupportive in times when it's extremely unhelpful. But I also think that an element of that comes from the social media campaigns that have become part of the club.
And also potentially just from anxiety, I would argue. And that anxiety will have dissipated to a degree, given the fact they have got over the line.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think that the same fear factor exists now in Arsenal as it would have done if they hadn't have just gone on and won their last 5 games of the season. Like there was that period, lost to City, lost to Southampton, they lost to Bournemouth, they drew with Sporting, they lost to City, they drew with Atleti. And they had 2 wins in between all of those like weird results that just weren't fitting with their season. But they've come out of it. Of course, Fulham helped them on their way to this because Fulham was the one that opened the door because they beat them 3-0 at home.
Arsenal B.
Yeah. So they beat Fulham 3-0 and able to rest some players. And then they go 1-0, 1-0, 1-0, 2-1. And here they are arriving in a Champions League final with that winning feeling. And I think that that's really important. We shouldn't forget either that over the course of this Champions League campaign, not only were they the best team, but they have beaten some decent sides across the competition so far. I mean, I think that the Atleti game was particularly key in showing themselves what they're capable of, but they've also beaten Bayern Munich 3-1 earlier in the season. And they beat Inter Milan, didn't they, as well earlier in the season. And those are big results outside of English football that give yourselves a marker of what you're capable of. And even though, as I say, performances haven't been there, they have still been able to get results. So, Jack, generally to like just reflect on like how I feel right now, I'm definitely higher and hotter on Arsenal than I was. I still completely accepting that this is not a game they are favourites for. And here's what I'm worried about. They've got the results, but they haven't had performances. And I am concerned for them that while over those 5 games, results improved, performances didn't really raise that high compared to where you probably need to be to win a Champions League final. And that is now going to be the test of them because it's like, can we raise everything? You've got one more game to give it everything. And while it's great that the optimism has returned, I am concerned that the one trend has been that the performance levels are just below where they were earlier in the year when they were the best version of themselves. And I would be surprised if they can win this final by being anything less than the best version of themselves. Like, they won't lose this game 5-0, right? Like Inter Milan did last season. That will not happen. Like, I will confidently say Arsenal will not lose this cup final 5-0. But I'm concerned. The reason I don't think it'll be 5-0 is because David Raya has been superb and he's come up with some massive moments.
My player of the season for what it's worth.
And I understand. He's been great, particularly in key moments that have kind of defined games. Defence is extremely strong, apart from fullback. I'm worried about right back. We'll have to wait to see. Obviously, that's a conversation itself as to who ends up playing there, who's available right there. But I'm sure you'll talk in your part about Kvaratskhelia and stuff. And like, that is the fear factor for me for Arsenal is like, is that going to be is that the weakness of Arsenal? But the other weakness is that the attack has struggled a bit. And while I think it's a good sign that they've been managing to get over the line and win 1-0, where is the attack that we saw December and January that stuck 3 past Bournemouth, 3 past Chelsea, 3 past Inter, a couple past Man United, 3 past Sunderland. They were consistently, even if you go back to the start of the season when they were 5 against Leeds, 4 against Atleti. This is a side that consistently scored more than 2 goals earlier in the campaign, and those games have been harder to come by. So that's where my fears are for Arsenal. But I'm trying to be optimistic for them because I do feel that they have managed to get themselves back on track just in time to give themselves hope of beating PSG in a way that I wouldn't have believed possible a week ago.
So go on then, just before we go to break, if Arsenal are going to win this game, it happens by a tight margin. We're both assuming at this point. But where are the battles that are where it's won and lost? Is this one where it's just got to be perfect from the spine of this team? It has to be perfect from the centre backs. It has to be perfect from Raya. It has to be perfect from the midfield. It
has to be boring, mate. It has to be boring.
And if there is going to be boring, how do Arsenal set up in the middle in particular? I think that's where I'm really interested. I'm with you in that if Jurrien Timber isn't back, then I think that they're going to struggle at right back. And I know that Zubimendi played there in the game against Crystal Palace and actually was quite an interesting development in terms of what that looked like. But is this just one of those where they have to absolutely pack the midfield and stop PSG working the ball through the middle of the park?
Maybe, but Arteta's not going to try anything new here, is he? Like, he does have belief in these players. And Odegaard is going to have a big role to play here in terms of his leadership. And I think that bridge between Arteta and the rest of the team from Odegaard is going to be extremely important. And there's no doubt that obviously PSG's combinations in the middle are, I don't even know how to describe them, like...
Out of this world.
Out of this world. They are. And I would give them, if I was to choose one of the midfields that I wanted to have as my midfield for Fulham, I'd choose PSG's. But I do think Arsenal can combat it. And as I say, I think that if that's that Declan Rice has to, put in one of his all-round Superman performances where he just doesn't stop running, rattles people, but doesn't get too emotional, then that's okay. I know that some people don't rate Declan Rice as highly as I do, and I will not think that he is up to producing a man-of-the-match performance in a game like this. But my opinion is he has to. He has to. Because if he doesn't, then I don't think that Arsenal have a player who can combat. And when I say the energy of the PSG midfield, I don't just mean like the player for player energy levels. I mean as a combination.
The intensity of it.
The intensity of the three of them in there is too much. Like, it will overwhelm you, and that's why Rice has got such a tough job on his hands to try and stop it. And that's obviously why Arteta made obviously big decisions in terms of the players that he left on the bench at Crystal Palace the other day. Gabriel, Odegaard, Rice, Saka, Gyökeres, like big players to leave out on the last day. But obviously he's got an eye on making sure the energy levels are full for this game. And I personally think that is it. I don't know. Can they stop them scoring is probably my biggest thing, mate. As I say, by making it boring, I think they give themselves a chance. You can't be boring for 90 minutes. You've got to at some stage come to life. But they do have to suck the life out of it, I think, in the first half. Because if PSG take the lead in this game in the first 20 minutes, I think Arsenal are dead.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, it sounds really basic, but there is no way back, I don't think. I think Arsenal
if
need
PSG
to
score one in the first 20, there's no way they're not scoring again. That's how I would look at it.
Yeah, although they didn't score again against Bayern. And that's the interesting element of that. They didn't need to, which is worth pointing out at that point. But equally, they gave themselves that cushion. And after a lot of discussion around whether they could defend or not, and look, we had these conversations, we had comments on these podcasts being like, if Arsenal play in the final against either of these teams after the first leg of the PSG Bayern game, they'll lose because they're like a sieve defensively, and Arsenal will not let them have the same kind of space. Equally, shutting them down is a far harder ask than anything else they've been tasked with over the course of this season. All right, let's take a break there. When we come back on the other side, we'll get into the PSG of it all. Stick with us here on Ranks FC.
Welcome back to Ranks FC. I've told you what I think of Arsenal's chances, but now Jack is going to tell me why PSG are the monster that is impossible to kill as we get to this final. I assume that's where you're going with this anyway.
I mean, To a point, yes. I mean, this is attack, I think, is like a hydra, right? You cut one head off, you shut one head down, and you get bitten by another one. And that's been the case for such a long time. We saw that in the Bayern game. They were like, okay, we're going to have to kind of throw people over to one side to stop Kvaratskhelia absolutely running riot. And suddenly Desiree Doué is bending down on goal. Suddenly Ousmane Dembele is opening up spaces. They are an incredible attacking force, and the way that they're able to, tear teams apart once games get opened up, I think is a very scary proposition for anybody that has to come up against this team. But let's start with a little bit of a concern, and we can go on to the kind of positives after that, because there is an injury concern over Achraf Hakimi at right back. And look, for what it's worth, I think that Hakimi is the best right back in the world. I think he is one of the most potent attacking forces in world football. And I think defensively, he's, pretty rock solid as well. In able to just sort of cover down an entire flank. He allows PSG to different players sort of drift into areas where they're able to combine and make those kind of cute one-on-one passes that open up teams who might be like, oh, okay, we'll deal with the front three. And then suddenly you've got this fourth member flying forward on top of the midfielders dropping in as well. And I think that's incredibly difficult to deal with. Now, Warren Zaire-Emery has done a wonderful job, I think, this year, not only reinstating himself in this PSG team as a wonder kid that kind of broke through a couple of years ago, but also in filling in at right back when Hakimi's been absent. But I think that when Zaire-Emery plays at right back, obviously they don't possess the same kind of threat down that right-hand side because he is nowhere near as an offensive weapon as Hakimi is. But also the energy of the midfield changes. Now, that's not always a bad thing. I think that Fabian Ruiz is, one of my favorite players on earth, and two, a player who has the capacity to dictate and define these kind of finals. I think he was very unlucky not to win player of the tournament when Spain won the Euros. I think he was absolutely crucial to that team. And I think he was crucial to PSG winning the Champions League last season. Now, given that Vitinha and João Neves are in there is a sense sometimes I think that he is the forgotten man. He is not the exciting, young, diminutive Portuguese footballer, either, raking passes out left, right and centre or bombing around, putting out fires. But I think he's equally as important. And to be honest, I think whatever happens at right back, it's probably Fabian Ruiz that gets the nod to start in this final, just adding a little bit of experience to what is still a pretty young team. Him and Marquinhos, really the only kind of old guard in this team that play on a regular basis. So I think that he will come in there. But without Hakimi, you change the dynamic in terms of what you can do. And whoever Arsenal go with at left back, we assume it will probably be Calafiori at this point. However they kind of choose to approach that. If Hakimi is playing, it shifts the entire dynamic of how you have to try and defend against PSG. If he's not, then you have maybe a little bit more space to try and exploit down that side in yourselves. And I think that would give Arsenal an outball in terms of what that looks like. But really, for me, there's only two things that could potentially derail this PSG side. Hakimi's injury is one of them. I think he's that good that him being absent would genuinely kind of potentially shape the tie a little bit differently. The other one is that as good as this PSG team have been in spells this season, the consistency has been lacking. Now, I watched their final game of the season, which at this point was like 10 days ago against Paris FC, who also knocked them out of the Coupe de France. And it is quite nice that we have a Paris derby going on in many regards. But I thought that they were very weirdly off the boil in that game. Now, look, there are some caveats to that. Dembele went off after 27 odd minutes. They played Lucas Beraldo at right back. Zabani got a go with William Pacho recovering, and Luchea played at left back in the absence of Nuno Mendes. Not all of those things are going to happen in the same game in the final, right? So you have to take the kind of individual result with a pinch of salt. But it's not been the only one where PSG have just looked a bit all over the place at random moments over the course of this season. And it's what led to the fact that there was still a title race by the time that they went into that penultimate game against Lens, which they ultimately won relatively comfortably in the end. They went ahead quite early on and then they finished it off towards the end of the game. But actually, I thought they defended really, really well. So there is this sense with PSG that whilst they are a joy to watch in so many different ways, and whilst they have been phenomenal for the majority of the last 2 years, especially in Europe, that maybe the elements that are missing feels like too much of a word, but that they have an off day every so often. We saw it in the Club World Cup final against Chelsea, where they simply couldn't deal with the long ball over the top and the combination that Joao Pedro and Cole Palmer had in that final. And they felt all over the place. Now, that was at the end of a very long season where they'd gone and become champions. But this has been another year where they've basically not had any break whatsoever. And look, we talk about the fact that they started the season relatively poorly in some regards. And, it ultimately hasn't stopped them from, one, winning the league, and two, getting to another Champions League final where they have the quality and the ability to go back to back and just be just the second team after Real Madrid to retain the trophy in this Champions League era. That really would be the start of something kind of dynastic in many ways. I think they have, for my money, the best manager on the planet right now. I think they have, for my money, the best midfield on the planet right now. And I think they have, for my money, the best attack on the planet right now, which is a pretty good starting place. Now, the defense probably is a little bit weaker than it was last year. They haven't had the same kind of consistency. And in Donnarumma, they had a goalkeeper who wasn't always consistent over the course of a league season. And we've spoken about that before, but who came up big in the big games. And we saw that in the Champions League run, right? The penalty shootout, sure, the game against Arsenal last time out, where he was absolutely phenomenal in that semi-final. And in Safanov, they have a goalkeeper who was very much the second choice at the start of the season, who has come into his own and has made some really good saves. But ultimately, if you were picking a PSG and Arsenal joint 11, David Raya is getting the nod from almost every single person that you ask in this setup, right? And rightly so, because he has been phenomenal. But I think you pick quite a lot of this PSG. You pick quite a lot of the Arsenal centre-backs as well. And I love Marquinhos, and I think William Pacho is excellent. But that partnership of Gabriel and Saliba has been so good. And then the fullbacks, maybe you go into a different place. But if Hakimi is out, then that becomes more of a question. Where I think Arsenal are going to struggle, if Timber isn't playing, is whoever has to deal with Kvaratskhelia on that side. He's been phenomenal form in the Champions League. He's got 16 goal contributions. I think it's 10 goals and 6 assists. And he has just been a menace for the entirety of this season in European competition. It's where he seems to step up. It's where he seems to be getting these big moments. And for me, as good as Christian Mosquera has been this season, and I like him more at right back than most people seem to, that kind of choppiness that Kvaratskhelia opens up, the fact that Nuno Mendes can get up that channel and help him out. And if you are looking at what Fabian Ruiz brings to the table in that midfield, his ability to drift out left into those wide channels and open up those passes, arcing passes in behind. And Arsenal, I don't think, are going to defend on the edge of their own box, right? This is a team very comfortable with how they defend. They defend higher up the pitch at times. They do leave gaps in there because they're very, very good at filling them. And it doesn't mean that there's loads of space that Arsenal, let players in behind. This is a different animal in terms of what this PSG team is. And look, Ousmane Dembele would be a massive miss if he was to be not there. But I think that for me, this is Kvaratskelia's final. And I would be very, very surprised if Arsenal can find a way to shut him down for the entirety of this. Now, whether that is Bukayo Saka tracking back, whether that is Declan Rice being asked to play that role on the right-hand side of the midfield in order to get in there and kind of double up on these players, however they try to deal with that, the issue is that you open up gaps elsewhere for other people to exploit. And if you are drifting Declan Rice over into those areas because he needs the help, are you running the risk of letting Vitinha dictate the entirety of this final, as he's done so many times, as we've watched him do so many times? So in terms of where the midfield balance looks like and what that setup looks like for Arsenal, the thing I'm struggling with is how they shift this midfield engine in order to be able to close down the number of threats that they're going to have to deal with, given that their first choice right back is more than likely going to be absent. And I don't know if I can find on paper an answer for that quandary that isn't going to leave them exposed in a different area. And I think that's where they'll go get the edge, PSG.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a fair assumption to make. One thing I think we should point out is obviously the semi-final against Bayern Munich when they won 5-4 was the type of game that Arsenal just don't get involved in. We wouldn't expect to see, but was obviously also one of the best games we've ever seen. Since that day, we haven't seen that kind of ruthlessness from PSG. And where I was talking there about Arsenal winning their last 5 games of the season and just like getting themselves back on track, PSG's season hasn't been like sensational in terms of the way it's ended. That game against Bayern Munich was 6 games ago, all right? 1-5-4, obviously it's the game of the season. It's the standout result, and it might be the game that propels them on to go and win the trophy. Since then, they've actually only scored 6 goals from 5 games. They drew 2-2 with Lorient, 1-1 with Bayern. They beat Brest 1-0, Lens 2-0, and they lost 2-1 to Paris FC. Now, look, I'm not reading loads into this because, like, the way they knew they were going to see out the league somehow, right? They would get over the line, and they did. And I think it's important to point out too that they haven't actually had that good a season. They've ended the season with 76 points in Liga, which isn't a high tally for PSG winning a league title. Like, I'm pretty sure it's quite rare to get under 80 points. I haven't checked that fact, so nobody called me out on it. But I'm pretty sure that would be an unusual number for PSG to end up on. But I'm intrigued really as to what we're about to see here from PSG. Have they been a bit reserved? Have they been just playing in a way that, again, would get themselves over the line and into this final so that they could then give themselves the best account of themselves? Or do Arsenal have an opportunity to do what Chelsea did to them in the Club World Cup?
I think that you have to look at all of those games in some context, right? Their best performance in that period was the win against Lens, where they effectively just won the league title, took it away from them, and were like, no, you're not absolutely not doing that to us. You look at the team that played in the Lorient game, which was between the 2 legs of the semi-final, and it's like Ibrahim Mbaye played, Senemi Yulu played, Kangin Lee played. They played a weird 3 at the back system that didn't really make any sense. Like, it was a very, very, very heavily rotated team. And they didn't bring anyone on either, really. Zaire Emery came on and Joao Neves came on, but that was basically it. So you do look at it and take that, I think, with a pinch of salt in terms of how that game played out. And then from there, they effectively did what they needed to do to win the title, right? They beat Brest 1-0 and then they beat Lens, and that was that. Then they lose to Paris FC on the final day. I do think part of this is the idea that they've effectively just been gearing up for this final, because Luis Enrique is smart enough to know that it was job done in terms of what the league was. And look, I think you're probably right in terms of the kind of points tally and what that looks like. That is not a vintage season from a PSG perspective by any stretch of the imagination. Equally, they still won 24 of their 34 games. It's not bad going either. And I think that there has been a sense that a lot of the games, and look, some of them were rescheduled, and there was lots of talk about that. The Lens game was supposed to be earlier in the season before one of the Champions League games, and it got moved, and Lens were really deeply unhappy about it, and all of the above. And look, I agree with them. I think that they've got a fair case there that that's not how things should operate. You should be able to deal with things on multiple fronts. And I think the PSG have been given a slightly soft ride in terms of Liga and how it kind of played out in terms of the scheduling. But when you actually put the context of what they've been able to do in the Champions League in particular, you know, those games against Bayern, who, as we said earlier, were, I think, fundamentally, if you're going to put 3 teams at the top of the tree in Europe this season, Bayern are the one that you would be adding to Arsenal and PSG. Maybe Barcelona going forward. They absolutely eviscerated Liverpool in that first leg. And then even when Liverpool kind of went for it in the second, PSG were able to manage that game out. You look at the way that they absolutely took apart Chelsea. And yes, okay, this is a poor Chelsea side. I think PSG have grown into the Champions League again. And when you think back to the playoff, where weirdly they were like one header away from having to go all the way to extra time with Monaco, who they have scorched in the league, you're kind of looking at it and thinking, is this team, has it got the same wherewithal as it did last year? But I think they've shown over the game since then in the Champions League that they have the ability to raise it. And when you talk, you know, when you read about Luis Enrique and you kind of talk about what he's brought to the table, that laser-like focus in doing what is needed to get over the line, I think is probably the thing that you have to bear in mind here, that he is willing to effectively be like, okay, we've got to do the job, but what would make this team special? What would make this team a dynasty? What would make this team fundamentally and quintessentially the best team in Europe, no questions asked, is to win back-to-back Champions Leagues. I think they are going to be so drilled in on this in a way that Arsenal haven't been, because they've had the Premier League to focus on. And look, maybe that works in Arsenal's favour, but I don't think with Lucho in the dugout that he's going to let his players, not understand the assignment when it comes to this game on Saturday in Budapest.
Yeah, obviously the two managers have their own history. They've known each other for a long time. That's their playing days and stuff. So there is a narrative that's written in that sense. Their careers have kind of been entwined with how they've been great footballers, but also they've gone on to have coaching careers at the highest level. And, it's also interesting that Luis Enrique could easily have ended up as Arsenal manager if he had wanted to, before Arteta got the job.
And Arteta is a former PSG player.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a lot of crossover here in terms of how these two coaches have ended up going head to head. I think there'll still be a lot of respect between them. I think a lot of people would give Enrique the edge, but I think that Arteta is underrated. I think that he's been mocked quite a lot for his style of management, for some of his catchphrases, for some of the stuff we've seen on the documentaries that have gone out. I've laughed at some of those too. But I think he's still learning as to how he gets his messages across. What is the best way to manage a group of players? And I think that most of this squad absolutely love him. I think that he's won over a fan base that was certainly divided on him for certain sections of his reign so far. And I think that with that, Arteta's sort of regained some sort of parity coming into this final. I think that Enrique still sits one level up from him, but I don't feel that Arteta is coming into this final fearing that he cannot combat tactically whatever Enrique might have up his sleeve. So I think that's an interesting element of it, certainly.
I agree. I mean, look, Lucho's already said that Arsenal are the best team without the ball in the world, right? The question is going to be what happens when PSG do have the ball. I think that with a squad that has already won it, and again, Arsenal have made mockery of that to a point with the Premier League in terms of the experience that they have in having gone and won it for the first time in 22 years against the City juggernaut in some regards. Like, they've already made a mockery of one. Why could they not do it with another? But I think they have the more experienced squad in terms of what this final is about, PSG. I think they have the more experienced manager. And I think when it comes to it, if you were picking, and going back to that point I made before about a joint 11, and I know that obviously when we talked about the fact that Arsenal's strength is in the collective rather than the individual, you're probably still picking 8, 7 PSG players at a minimum in terms of where this squad is at. And I think that probably will tell when it comes to the final in this one. And I do think that whilst I'm with you in that I give Arsenal more of a chance than I did a couple of weeks ago, because I think that getting the Premier League title over the line will potentially free them up from a kind of psychological perspective, knowing that the season has already been a success, knowing that, they've already seen the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people kind of swarming the Emirates, all through the week, the Arsenal shirts that have been out left, right and centre in London. All of that is testament to what they have managed to go and achieve. I just feel like PSG are going to have too much in possession. And if they get the ball and they start running at you, and if Arsenal do leave those spaces in behind, and if there is not this cover in the midfield, which I can't see them doing, because if it was me in Mikel Arteta's position, I would go Rice, Lewis Skelly, Zubimendi. And I would try to shut that midfield down and effectively close it all off. But I don't think he's going to do that. No, and I think that they're going to get pulled around too much by, as we said right at the start, this kind of hydra of a monster that is Paris Saint-Germain.
Interesting. So you're back in PSG?
I'm going to back PSG to go back to back, I think, at this point.
I'll back Arsenal. We'll go 50-50 on that one.
Well, at least someone's going to be right. That's always a good element for the podcast. Right, we're going to take a little break there. When we come back, and some little fun bits to finish things off. Make sure you stick with us here on Ranks FC. Welcome back to part 3 of Ranks FC, where I'm delighted to say that we're going to be handing over to your new history teacher, Mr. Jones, for a little look back at some recent Champions League history.
I just think it's important sometimes to kind of recap on history as we head into a finals. It's like, the World Cup's starting soon, and one of the things that I'm going to be doing over the next couple of weeks is rewatching those videos that you get that FIFA make on the highlights of the whole tournament, and you just remember the pathways that were there for when whoever it was won the competition. And with Champions League finals, I like to just remember where we're at and what the recent finals were. And there are trends there as well that I think we should consider. So obviously last season, it was a bit of an anomaly, really. PSG beat Inter Milan 5-0 in Munich. An absolutely resounding, ridiculous scoreline.
An evisceration.
It's just insane. Hakimi put PSG ahead in that game. Doué ended up scoring a brace. Kvaratskhelia got one, and Miulu got one too. But it's not normal for that to be the scoreline. And I started thinking, because I'm like, I just remember, Champions League finals are usually cagey. There's not a lot between them. That's what I usually think in my head. And there's a reason I think that, because I was looked back, and in the last 7 Champions League finals, first and foremost, only one of the 2 teams has actually scored. The last 7 Champions League finals were 1-0. So one of the teams did not score. So yes, Inter Milan lost 5-0. But the final before that, Real Madrid 2, Borussia Dortmund 0. That one was at Wembley, right? The 4 finals before that all ended 1-0. Man City beat Inter Milan. Real Madrid beat Liverpool. Chelsea beat Man City. And Bayern Munich beat PSG in the COVID final where there was no fans, 1-0. Even the final before that, in 2019, Liverpool beat Tottenham 2-0. I find that really strange, but also I think it's important to take that into this final, that could well be the case. And like, one of the things I've got in my head is like, if Arsenal win this final, as I've said before, it's 1-0. And I genuinely believe like that's going to be the scoreline. If Arsenal win this trophy, it's either 1-0 or it's like 1-1 and goes into extra time or something. But I'm like, yeah, this kind of backs that up for me. Do you see PSG winning a final 1-0? I don't really see them having a tight win. I think a PSG win is like more, it just feels like it would be more resounding than that. I don't know if that's because they take the lead and then the other team has to come out and play. But I don't know. It just feels to me like PSG bucked the trend last year and they'll try to do it again if they can. I'm telling you again, it won't be 5-0. But yeah, isn't that interesting that in the last 7 years that's been the case?
I do think it is interesting, but also I do think with this PSG side, there is a case of if you go out and chase the game, they're going to tear you apart. And ultimately, in a final like this, if you are losing, 1-0 to an extent, I think Arsenal will probably just sort of continue to keep it tight. If that goes to 2, you've got to start chasing pretty early. And as soon as you start chasing the game against this PSG, I think you get caught in, and look, Bayern felt that sting, right? And although they scored a number of goals themselves, you actually look at the way that PSG dealt with that game. And, they've raced into a 5-2 lead. And you'd argue, and I don't think there'd be many, even the most committed Arsenal fan, who would argue with you that Bayern have a more potent attack than Arsenal, right? So when you're looking at the way that goals go in and the way that goals are scored, you're not expecting the same thing here from Arsenal as you did from Bayern Munich. No, maybe they will take some heart from the idea that Dayot Upamecano scores from a set piece, that they were able to hurt PSG from set pieces in the league stage of this competition when they met last season. It doesn't mean that, none of these things are possible. I just feel like they're the kind of team that want you to open up in front of them. And the more goals that they end up leading by, the more likely that is to happen. And that's why the Inter game ended up in such an evisceration, as we say, because of the way that PSG, kind of forced them into action and then took advantage of some glaring weaknesses and some openness at the back that maybe wouldn't have been there if Inter had taken a 1-0 lead.
Yeah, that's fair enough. What is your favourite Champions League final of all time?
That's a very, very good question. I mean, one of my kind of first football memories is I was watching the Champions League final in 2005, back when it was, on a Wednesday night still. Mm-hmm. And I remember at half time, and I was maybe 10, 11, and my dad was like, you have to go to bed. Like, it's now like 9 o'clock, right? Mm-hmm. Like you need to go to bed. You've got school in the morning, etc. And I was kind of looking at it and being like, okay, all right, fine. It's 3-0. Like, Liverpool aren't going to come back from this. And after they scored the first one, my dad came and got me. He came upstairs and was like, you probably should come back down. And so I watched the rest of the game with my dad that night, and obviously got to witness the miracle of Istanbul in real time, which was pretty cool. For dad to have done that for a 10-year-old was pretty cool. And I very much enjoyed that moment and being able to watch it and witness it. So I'm going to say that one for nostalgia's sake.
Yeah, I mean, that is obviously one of the best ones anyway, just because that's so rare to see something like that open up. And it was an unbelievable story. I remember watching that game in a pub with some friends, actually. And I mean, at half time, you just like, it was dead. It was done.
Should we go home?
Yeah. It was like, you were kind of just switching off from you were like, oh, do you want to play pool or whatever? And yeah, obviously, there's a big turnaround in that one. I think... what would be my favourite? I mean, I did like the Man United Chelsea one because I enjoyed the John Terry slip, but it wasn't a good final. It wasn't really a memorable one, apart from the fact it was two English teams going head to head. The one I probably remember most for going to was 2011 at Wembley, Barcelona 3, Man United 1.
Just one of the best individual performances in a game from a team that we've ever seen. They were just so good. Yeah,
I mean, they dominated the game, Barcelona. At the time, you thought Man United might have a chance, and you thought particularly with the venue being Wembley, it might balance things out a little bit and all the rest of it. But on the day, Barca absolutely outplayed Man United. United just tried to get bodies behind the ball and kind of break up play as they could, and then they'd try to, I'd say play on the break, but they'd play kind of quick balls on the break and far balls, so they would get it out of their feet and just look to the flanks or whatever, or look to get the attackers out of there quickly. But it just wasn't working for them that day. Pedro, Messi and David Villa on the score sheet for Barcelona. Wayne Rooney had made it 1-1 in that game and gave United hope. You go back through those lineups, just an unbelievable set of teams in that moment. But yeah, for me, I was covering it as well that day, so I was in the press box at Wembley, and that was certainly quite a special one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be there for a performance like that, really quite special, I think, and a very, very enjoyable one as well to witness. And on that note, Dean, I think we'll probably call this to a close. That is our Champions League final preview for 2026. So all that's left for me to do, say a massive, massive thank you to Mr. Dean Jones.
Cheers, mate.
I've been Jack Collins. This has been Ranks FC Champions League Takeaway, and I'll look forward to this Champions League final. We'll be back next week, obviously, to take a look back at it and evaluate it and see who was right and who was wrong. But for now, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you all very, very shortly, Rank Squad. Take it easy. Peace.